to make sure. So next up, someone who doesn't need any introduction because she's already been introduced, is Desiree. So Desiree, why don't you just come on up? Let's not hold it. Desiree's going to give us a little talk on her experiences on communication.
Yes. So I've had 4 cups of coffee. Good luck to all of you. All right, so I'm going to talk about something, talk a little bit about my experiences and essentially try to make sense of the statement that I said yesterday, which is that I believe that government is an incubator of change. So tell a little bit of bio. I was not supposed to be in government. I was supposed to be making lots of money as a lawyer. Well, that didn't happen. I worked for a law firm called Skadden Arps in New York City. They paid me a lot of money. And at the time when everyone was suing tobacco companies, U.S. Tobacco was my client. So I was sitting across from a woman who had visible effects of smoking. And she made it abundantly clear that I was on the wrong side of the table. And I remember thinking, I think I am on the wrong side of the table, and I don't want to do this. So I got up and walked out. And I decided that I wanted to understand what system or systems were supposed to inform her, protect her, communicate with her about the effects of smoking. So I went to grad school. So my parents were like, oh, she's not gonna make any money. Oh, I was like, well, we never had money anyway, so nothing changed. So went and got a master's in public policy through a program called Nash Urban Fellows. Went to Indianapolis, worked for Mayor Bart Peterson. And it was there that I realized that if you have an innovative leader, change can happen. Government doesn't have to be an impediment to progress and process. So he wanted to be the first mayor in the country to have the authority to charter schools. I'd written a paper about invoking competition. And so helped him get that authority and thought, oh my gosh, this is great. This is, like a very innovative leader who is listening to his constituency and trying to find ways to provide resources for them. Equity, parity, and equality in educational choices. 9/11 happened. I'm originally from New York. Brooklyn, but pretty much like a New York City gypsy. I've lived in every borough, including Staten Island, yes. So, decided to come back, heard there was some billionaire guy running to be mayor, and that I thought was insane. But anyway, decided to sit down with him. Was really, really taken aback by his approach about government, right? So he had built this media thing and wanted to do something completely different in New York City. 9/11 kind of changed things a bit. So I decided to come back home and I wanted to work for him. So I essentially became a lobbyist for him, film tax credit, tort reform, the smoking ban, lobbying to 51 city council members. Yeah, that's a lot of people. 51 city council members on behalf of the administration and Mayor Bloomberg. And then shortly after that, we decided, you know what, we need to redefine New York City. So we decided, again, and it was definitely coming from the mayor and his senior team, had this conversation about cities as incubators of change, but that people would pay to be associated with a brand like New York City. So we created New York City Marketing Development Corporation, which is the thought that people would really, really pay lots of money to associate with New York and associate with their intellectual property and associate with their assets as they define them. So we did things like sold Times Square. Police commissioner wasn't too happy about that, but anyway. So we would shut down Times Square. We sold it to Universal Studios. We synchronized all the jumbotrons, let them build a big King Kong right in the middle of Duffy Square. For those of you who've been to 42nd Street, there's a lot of traffic that goes that way. But the thought again there was that government can be an interesting platform for innovative solutions, for revenue enhancers, and to produce and create a new sponsorship package, right? So I was like, oh, this is cool, this kind of innovative thing. And again, it came from a very forward-thinking leader and his senior team. Fast forward, a friend of mine was running for mayor, again, in Newark. And this time, was told that he was gonna win. So I said, okay, that's an interesting one. Had conversations with him and decided to work for Newark. And I worked for Cory Booker for 4 years. And there's where I realized the connection between technology and people. It didn't have to be, there didn't have to be this disconnect. Challenge there was, traditional media only wanted to focus on the deaths that were happening, right? So violent communities, all they wanted to do was come in, focus on bad stuff, and then that's it. My challenge was, how do I get to tell the real story about this city? How do I get to redefine the brand? How do I get people to understand that this guy, Cory Booker, is the real deal, number one, but number two, he's so passionate about this city, and number three, we're gonna be the epitome of urban transformation here in Newark, a city of 280,000 folks. Bold? Of course it is. So we decided we needed help, right? We didn't rely on traditional ways of communicating. We actually came down to Silicon Valley. I remember having a conversation with this guy, Ashton Kutcher. At the time, he was racing with CNN. And this whole Twitter thing was kind of taking a new form. And he basically told us that, you know, this is an opportunity for the mayor, it's an opportunity for a city the size of Newark to redefine itself online, to redefine its brand online through technology. It's like, okay, what are you talking about? I got people who want jobs. What technology? Do you know the digital divide in Newark? Are you kidding me? But we decided to come to Silicon Valley, and we had an amazing meeting with Ning, so Gina from Ning. We had Loic from Seismic. We had Ev, we had Biz. We had Sean Parker all in the room, and we talked about cities. And we talked about the power of cities. And we talked about cities as incubators of change, and that if there's ever going to be any significant change that happen in this country, it's going to be in those cities. But how do we communicate to the masses that this is what we want to do? So we went back and forth, and they decided that they would agree to align with us, and we created the Newark Tech Group. And it was the first group of its kind, and really, to their credit, they really worked with us to harness the power of social media and technology for a constituency of 280,000 folks around education, around business, around development, and around any other story that we were trying to get out and convey. It was an amazing thing for us, and they were also, you know, pretty helpful whenever we had to say something online. Their whole network would just help us promote that message. And so what happened? Well, we got bigger than the traditional media. Right? The mayor had a following of about 1 million followers on Twitter, lots of Facebook friends. We created our own channel, a broadcast network. So finally, we were creating our own content, and traditional media was following us. So those are just 3 examples, and I'll give one more about how I believe government can be incubators of change, but it really, in my opinion and my experience, has been that the leaders have had a lot to do with this, and that you need both their leadership, their engagement, and their involvement, and you also need help from outside entities. Government can't do it alone. So I'm here to tell you guys that we have ideas in government, but we also need help. And part of it is, it's like a match, right? It has to make sense. It has to be relevant. Tell you one quick story about how we realized that technology, social media was very important to cities. Many of you remember Conan O'Brien's late night show. Remember Conan, redhead? Okay. So we launched what we thought was a really, really significant healthcare program in a time when Congress and the president couldn't agree on what the hell healthcare was. And we partnered with the Heinz Philanthropies, and we decided that we would provide free healthcare to residents in the city who could sign up. They paid for it, we promoted it. Great partnership. So we had a press conference, mayor stands up there, oh, this is great, couple of hits, national, local, regional. Later that night, Conan O'Brien says on his show, oh, here the mayor of Newark is promoting a new program. And it got a lot of fanfare, yeah, it did. Yeah, it was a bus ticket out of Newark. Everyone laughed. Oh. Later that night, I got lots of calls from people who were saying, that's not funny. And what do? Right? Number one, we've established this Newark Tech Group, so now people are feeling empowered, like they can at least access that base. People were knowing in the city at least how to engage with technology and use it to promote their own messages, and we partnered with them to do that. And what was interesting was the entire city felt, including city government really, but we all felt empowered to respond like we could, right? So what did we do? We created a video. And we blasted Conan O'Brien. And we said, Conan, you don't know anything about Newark. We have Prudential Center, we have businesses, we have this, we have that, we have strong, rich history. We are Brick City, we are resilient people, we are awesome, you suck. And we put it on YouTube. And I gave a heads up. I called the woman who was the executive producer at the time. Her name was Peterkin. And the conversation went like this. Hi, this is Desiree Peterkin. I'm Director of Communications for Mayor Cory Booker. May I please speak with Peterkin? Yeah, this is where are you calling from again? Newark. Okay, yeah, yes. Can I help you? Well, last night you made a joke about the city. And well, I think, so here's our policy with our jokes. Our jokes are jokes. So we really don't comment on them. Are you a reporter? You're not a reporter. I said, okay, but I just want to give you a heads up that we put it online. Beep. Hello? Hello? I was like, all right, fine. So, in a matter of 4 hours, the video that we had put online had created so much of a buzz that people were really defining their teams. Team Coco and Team Booker. Right? So it was great for us. And then all of a sudden, residents were pulling out their little flip cams and standing on the corners and saying, hey, Conan, you don't know anything about Newark. We're strong, we're resilient, you suck, posting it. All went viral, right? And so all of a sudden, a city that didn't really have access to this technology or didn't know that they could be as influential as Conan O'Brien, they were being recognized. And so it went back and forth. Conan finally responded to our videos, I should say. It lasted all week. So for a traditional communications person, I'm like, yeah, keep talking about Newark every week. Come on, yeah, keep it going. Let's go, let's go. So it was great for me. And he would bash us and he would respond with another video. He would bash us, respond with another video. And finally, the woman and she's now good friends with me, Peterkin called me and she said, is this Desiree? Yes, this is Desiree Peterkin Bell. Okay, well, so what do you guys want? Do you want, we can make a donation. I said, no, I don't want a donation. I want you to apologize on TV. I want you to say all the things that we have in Newark. I want you to say that we're great. I want you to say that our leader is great. I want you to take back your comments. Well, those are jokes. So we can't really do that. So how about we have you guys on the show? I said, okay, that's fine. And then went back and forth with their writers. Long story short, it resulted in the mayor being on the late night show, Late Night with Conan O'Brien. NBC gave us $100,000 and donated to that program so that folks can get more health insurance. And they were really taken aback by the power of a city of 280,000 folks to respond to the great late night Conan O'Brien. But again, the thought there was that if we can, communicate that technology can be helpful to folks and empowering, then they get to define their own stories. They get to define their own, even sometimes they get to define how the story is written, how it's framed, and you might get something out of it too. So just wanted to talk a little bit about those things before we get into the city of Philadelphia stuff. One of the reasons I moved to the city of Philadelphia, besides having gone to Swarthmore College and to prep school in that area, was because I had heard about a number or small communities of folk who were interested in technology, who were interested in partnering with city government. And it was like a community of folk. So the difference in New York was we were redefining a whole city through a completely different paradigm. New York City Marketing Development Corporation selling New York City assets. In Newark, government we were pushing technology and defining it for everyone else and informing them that it could be helpful and useful. In Philadelphia, it was very different. In Philadelphia, it was, you know what, there's a real grassroots movement here, and they want to engage with the city. And it was great because we had a mayor who wanted to find out ways and figure out any and every way to communicate with his constituency because he understood and understands that people receive information differently. We talked a little bit about this yesterday, which is that the thought that if you build it, they will come. Well, that concept is not only dated and whack, but it's a little cocky too, right? So that doesn't really work. What works is when you have folks who understand cities, their needs, the leadership, sometimes the political environment. Yeah, it sucks. Politics exists. It's in government. It ain't going away. You need to understand that, right? You need to understand how to navigate the vagaries of a bureaucratic process. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that as we talk about the city of Philadelphia. And I also want to leave some time for questions because I want this to be a dialogue. I don't want to just talk. All right. So open access, Philly, and more. So one of the reasons, I mentioned that I moved to the city of Philadelphia was this community that existed. But the other thing, just like American cities, Philadelphia is no different. 22% of Philadelphians between the ages of 20 and 24 are unemployed, right? These are real statistics, so I won't read them. You see them up on there. When fellows come into the cities, it's important to understand your demographic. So you understand how to be most helpful to them, right? So, 5th largest city in the country. We're very excited about that. I sent us numbers. Woo-hoo. And interestingly enough, we have the largest number of young people from the last census. Largest number of young people in a 3-mile radius. Largest increase of about 16,000 folks. So, New York City and Boston are outliers. That's okay. So we're number 3. But we have a lot of young folks who are coming and staying in the city of Philadelphia, right? And folks know that oftentimes younger folks tend to communicate in a different way. Another stat is that out of the top 10 cities in the country, we have a poverty rate of 25%, which is fairly significant. 1.5 million people in the city. So what does that mean? That probably means, just looking at this, right, that how many folks don't have access to a computer? Well, 41%, right? So when you talk about building things, and when we talk about technology, how do we make it relevant? Right? How do you make it relevant? How do you draw a connection? How does whatever we create, whatever you create, because I'm just using it, whatever you create, help with the digital divide, help to empower people, help to make their lives better, help to make it easier for them to engage, interact, and respond to government? How do you make it easier for government to respond to a constituency request? Or to even want to create a funnel of communication? How do you do that? Because governments we're struggling with that. Almost every city government across the country has had a significant decline in revenues. 500,000 jobs have been lost in city government. People are having to redefine a new normal, right? So even in IT departments, some of that is slashed, half of it. Some folks have one person doing their IT stuff, right? And then you have maybe you have a communications director who kind of gets it and wants to shake up the, a normal process a little bit. But you have to understand your environment so you know how best to serve. All right. So, Open Access Philly, and we'll talk a little bit about what Open Access is. It's a group of about I'd say about 130 folks in the city of Philadelphia area who are really committed to kind of civic participation and engagement. Part of it is, we wanted to reach out to them, they wanted to reach out to us, but we also wanted to maintain and be very clear about what our goals are, right? So the other thing is, what are governments, how are you defining how you serve your constituents? So for us, safety, a place of choice, and the quality of life improves, and that includes everything. So literacy, workforce development, access to technology, and Philadelphia becomes the greenest city in America, and we're very serious about that. We think we're actually pretty close. Sorry, everyone. And that government is effective, efficient, and operates with integrity, right? So that's how any and everything that comes out of our office, comes out of our administration, fits under those goals. That's how we communicate. So when we sit down with Open Access Philly, when we are talking about what's useful for the city of Philadelphia, we always talk about those goals. Open Access Philly, and Jeff Friedman here has been, I'd say, nurturing this group since last August. And really, it's an amazing, I think it's amazing relationship between government and just civic-minded. I can't even, I don't want to do a commercial up here about open access, but it's an amazing relationship. And it's something that when the fellows came to Philadelphia, wanted to make sure the fellows connected with, right? And open access also understood it wasn't competitive, right? This is a resource for the city. So here you have 4 parts of Open Access Philly: civic participation and innovation. And so really that is just making sure that we're leveraging technology as a tool. Free information flow, getting the data in the folks' hands. Digital inclusion, making sure that folks have access to this, right? So again, going back to you build it, they will come, that's cocky, dumb, and just don't work. So making sure that folks have access to this stuff. So one of the partnerships I'll talk about, and I mentioned it yesterday, is Freedom Rings, which actually is a partnership through the federal government that allows us to build 77 computing centers all over the city of Philadelphia. And folks are learning workforce development, literacy programs, but they have access to computers, which means they'll have access to information, they'll have access to what is built, and hopefully they'll be able to use it. Infotech biz growth. So the idea of pretty much knocking down some impediments to technology and innovation, right? So this is how we communicate. What are the goals of the administration? How do we want to communicate with our constituency? Open Access Philly, and both of them are resources, right? There's an exchange that happens here. And city officials have been extremely open. This is a little small, so I'll just read some of the stuff. So city officials have been extremely open to using the resource of Open Access Philly. I mean, part of that is our partnership with Code for America Fellows. One quick story about the fellows, and that is that, and I hope this is true for every other city, when the fellows came to the city of Philadelphia, we wanted to make sure that everyone on our core team, again, we have a strong form of government, very strong deputy mayor system. We wanted to make sure, and this was a strategy that we had talked about, how do we make sure that they're not iced out? How do we make sure that they're not boxed out, right? And so the strategy was, I need to get the mayor because I know how he thinks, and I know that he is very, very engaged in communicating in very different ways and making sure that people have access to all this information. How do I get the fellows in front of him? Well, they need to meet with him, right? And some of the fellows, and you can talk to them about it, the meeting went something like this, where we were, tried to brief the mayor before, as you can imagine. Mayor has a whole bunch of events, and you're like, okay, so now we're going to do, this is Code for America. He's like, yeah, okay, I got it. Yeah, Code for America. Yeah, how many? Okay, yeah, okay, yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, okay, and then we have some fellas from Philly. He's like, oh, okay, go Philly, yeah. So we get in there, and then they're explaining, and we're explaining what, the project is again, after having explained it to him before. And again, he's very, very supportive of this. And so he sits back and he goes, hold on. This is free? Huh, I have some ideas. Okay, and he just starts talking. And, I was like, oh, this is great, he gets it. But also the fellows, I hope, and we have some here, got that he was really engaged and interested in this stuff. And then after that, we scheduled the meetings with the deputy mayors, right? Even some of the deputy mayors we thought were going to be a little difficult, and I was like, oh, goodness gracious, good luck with that meeting. We found that one of the deputy mayors, she brought her whole team to one of the meetings. She, I thought, would be the most difficult person. So I'm like sending texts to her chief of staff, like, please just make sure she doesn't say anything wrong. Okay, no, they're here for free. We don't want to scare them. And so she was very engaged, and it just happened across the board. And one of the things that the mayor said, and I hadn't even thought about this, which is, okay, we have deputy mayors. Why don't we break the fellows up by deputy mayors? Why don't we, instead of having them all focus on, one particular thing for right now, why don't we have them talk to everybody, right? So that really resonated with me. But as we talk about Code for America next year and the fellows going into cities next year, an important lesson is understanding the environment, but also making sure that you can identify who those folks are in the organization of government who can be your allies. Right? So our ally was the mayor and the entire deputy mayor group, which makes it a little easier. And we got it. And we got it because, again, I've had the pleasure of working for very engaged and innovative mayors. But, I mean, they got it. We got it. And it was a great experience. So anyway, that's my little story about that. So here you'll see, some of the programs that are, given what I talked about, the statistics and the environment of Philadelphia, that makes sense, resonates with people, right? So we have, Philly is a big history city, obviously. Democracy was born there. So we've created, phillyhistory.org. It'll probably be on the next slide. But it's a project, Philadelphia Department of Records. It's an online database of location-based historic photographs and map collections from the city archives and city water department, the office of the city representative, who was essentially like our cheerleader, and the free library. And folks can access all this stuff, right? We've created, Open Data Philly, which is, a portal, as you guys hopefully know, provides over access to 100 data sets and APIs. And that was a partnership, again, with the public-private collaborative that included the city, local GIS software company, Azavia, and other institutional and business organizations in the city. And Philly has, we're lucky in the sense that we have Comcast that is headquartered in the city of Philadelphia. And so they have become really good partners whenever we talk about making, whether it's around the digital divide or whether it's around empowering communities or whether it's around even Philadelphia being its own content creator and talking about how to tell its story. So a new project called Project Open Voice, which is a 3-year initiative that explores Comcast's ability to deliver local news. So imagine like a high-powered Facebook, a high-powered like YouTube channel, right? So any and everything Philadelphia. And that's what we're going to be working with Comcast on over the next 3 years. And it'll create portals for local media online and on demand in 6 communities, and we're one of those communities. So the idea there is that information really connects with people, right? Keyword here is people, things that will be relevant to government. And I already talked about Freedom Rings. But just a little bit of information about Freedom Rings again. The thought there really was, and we're in the second phase of Freedom Rings, which is the first phase is, okay, digital divide, getting access to computers to people. Second phase is, okay, how do you get them to use this and how do you get them to make this part of their lives, right? So what kind of programming, what kind of training, what kind of information can you provide so that it is impacting their communities? And what we're finding, and this is pretty much what we're doing, which is I'm hoping what will happen in other cities, is we are providing the resources for them, but we allowing a lot of that innovation to come from the community. So again, we have an innovative leader, innovative system and group of senior officials who at least acknowledge that we can't be the only people providing some information. And so a lot of the innovation is happening from the community, and they're telling us, oh, this is what we need, this is what we would like. And we're listening, right? So anything that we are doing here that's accessible to community members, it wasn't just us telling them, it was really them telling us what was useful and what's going to impact their lives. So I wanted to give you guys a little bit of flavor about what it is that we're doing in the city. We're trying to understand what our footprint is, and we think critical to that is working again this year with Code for America, which we're very excited about, But I also just want to say we've had a great experience, and we're going to have an even better experience next year in Philadelphia with the fellows. But I know that sometimes there's a little bit of a language gap between government and some people say techie, some folks say tech, enthusiast. And part of that is understanding the environment that you're walking into. And part of it is understanding how you're going to impact people's lives. And when you leave, making sure that folks are using the tools that you've created and making sure that that resonates with not just one community, but many communities. So that's my talk. Any questions? Questions, comments, concerns? Yeah.
So you mentioned for the Open Data Philly that you'd sort of reached out to the community and asked them sort of what data sets they were interested in. And I was sort of curious to know, number one, sort of where in the community, where in the city or in the city's community did you reach out to? And, number two, did you find that there was any sort of specific community or specific sector of people that responded? So for example, did more tech inclined people respond, or did you get people from sort of the health industry, or was there any kind of patterns there?
Well, the question is how you ask the question too, right? So when you say data set to someone in Northeast Philadelphia, they may not know what you're talking about, right? But if you say data set to the tech community, hell, they'll give you, everything. So part of it was crafting the message so we would say, what would be easier for you? How can we create a process, or what would be easy for you to engage with city government? And some folks would tell us that stuff, right? And that's what I mean about language. A lot of it is how do you ask the question? So we would have, conversations with different folks in the community, and we would walk into Open Access Philly and be able to have a question about data. We would walk into some of the business community, have a question about, licenses and inspections and making it easier, to engage with government. And we would have a conversation in Northeast Philly and say, okay, how do you want to engage with us? So a lot of it was about language, and we asked, the theme was the same, but we asked the information differently. I hope that answers your question. Okay.
So for us graduating fellows, where we're kind of here in the midst of tech heaven in the Silicon Valley, what would you say to us to, why should we come to Philadelphia to work there? What is it about Philadelphia that's special?
Philly's just better. I think I could go, I'll give you a couple more sentences, I guess. And that is that I think that you have a mayor who is extremely involved and interested in creating a new paradigm around how information is provided to constituents and how constituents engage with government. And I think we're lucky that way. So that's one. Two is you already have an existing community, Open Access Philly, that is really committed to civic innovation and participation. And so that whole cohort of folk are really focused on working with government. And I don't know if that exists everywhere. I have no idea. So Philly's just better, and then those two things that I just said.
So I've heard there's sometimes a bit of a gap between people organized in communities who are who've been part of the traditional warp and weft of life, and then sometimes people who are trying to create technical solutions to help them. So that there's these groups not necessarily talking back over each other or by each other, but just aren't completely aware of each other's work. Mm-hmm. I actually grew up in Philadelphia from '84 to '94, and I saw that there was sometimes a disconnect in communities, in many communities of communities. What role has tech played in connecting them to each other and having their language relate? and what advice do you give to people who are going into communities like that to find the people who are already doing good work but don't necessarily know about the technology out there that can help them do it, and vice versa?
A lot of it is showing them. So one thing that I call myself oftentimes is a translator, right? So I think I'm the only communications director here, but my job really is to translate, right? So I'm trying to, under my umbrella, I have, communication, strategic partnerships, making sure that people get information in very interesting ways, but also trying to convey all the good stuff that Philadelphia has to offer. And so for me, it is important to listen to what the tech community says they want to do and how they want to be helpful, and then sometimes even translate that internally to government officials and community members so that they get it, right? And so sometimes that might mean that Miss Irene in South Philly wants to find a way to get a lot of people in her neighborhood to plant trees, right? So, how does she do that besides going and knocking on all the doors? And then telling her, oh, well, Philly Tree Map exists. PhillyTreeMap.org exists. And so here's what you'd like to do, and then here's how we can make it happen, and then getting some folks to actually help us implement that. And so literally it's just sitting down and talking, and that's pretty much my job as a translator, making sure that people understand what's available after their needs are defined and talking to them. Did I answer your question? Okay. Yep, one more. No more? Gracias.